Yes.
Okay, Carrie moved. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Michelle.
And Hazel, seconder. All in favor?
Favor.
Anyone opposed? Seeing there are none, motion passed. Okay, number 4, we have delegations. It's Chris Hoyos here. Is Chris in the waiting room? Brooke,
He is not in the waiting room, unfortunately.
does he know that this is his time?
Yes, he is aware.
Okay, then let's move on to number 5 then while we wait for him. And Brooke, would you let us know, please, as soon as he comes into the waiting room?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. All right, number 5, adoption of the political liaison minutes for November the 28th. Hope you all have had a chance to read them over. I have one addition to it, and that was I was in attendance of the meeting. I'm not listed at the beginning, but I have made 3 motions during that meeting. So would you please add my name to being present? Yeah. Well, are there any other changes? Additions? Okay, could I have a mover then please to adopt the political liaison minutes of November the 28th?
I'll
move
move.
it, Sherry Lynn.
Sherry Lynn, seconder.
I'll second Hazel.
Hazel, all in favor? Motion passed. We have number 6 now. Gunjunkwa Structure, Jill Hill, Political Projects Analyst, to provide a verbal update. So Jill, are you prepared? Okay, would you please take it away?
Audrey, just before she starts, Greg, can you hear us? Can you go on mute? Thanks.
Hi, Audrey. I was just informed Jill is at a medical appointment, so she will not be doing the verbal update.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll go on to number 7. Okay, health and well-being. And we have a motion there. Do we have somebody here to speak to the motion?
Yes, we do. We have Jennifer in Mount Pleasant.
Okay, Jennifer, would you please speak to this motion?
Yeah, so we worked out a terms of reference for the task force, and now we're looking to get that terms of reference approved so we can carry on the work of the task force.
Would you read your motion, please? Jen?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. I have to look for it here. Just give me a sec here.
Is it okay if I read it, Audrey? Sorry, it's Alana.
That would be wonderful, Lana.
Okay. The recommendation is whereas the Six Nations of the Grand River Elected Council was made aware of multiple events at the federal schools at Six Nations where students were being bullied, and whereas the health, safety, and well-being of our community is of utmost importance, and whereas the Six Nations of the Grand River Elected Council directed by Band Council resolution that an anti-bullying task force be created, and whereas the Six Nations Health Services Department took on that responsibility and hired a coordinator to oversee the creation of the task force committee, and whereas COVID-19 pandemic halted this work for nearly 2 years, and whereas the coordinator and the task force have been able to pick up this work in 2022 and created a terms of reference that requires approval by Chief and Council to guide the work of the task force. Therefore, be it resolved that the Six Nations of the Grand River Elected Council accept the recommendation from the Anti-Bullying Task Force and approve the Anti-Bullying Task Force terms of reference as presented.
Okay, discussion. Does anyone have any questions for Lana or Jen?
Recording in progress.
I don't seem to see anyone's hand up or have been notified. So guess we're looking for a recommendation and a mover for this recommendation from health and the anti-bullying. Hazel?
Yeah, I'll move on it, but I wanted to ask, how many people were on that task force?
Jen or Lana?
The original task force or the task force that's running now?
Well, the one that's right now, I guess. How many people were on there?
We have about probably around 40 community members.
Oh, that's good. Do you have any young people as part of that task force?
We do. We have representation from the Six Nations Youth Council.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's good. I was just wondering because I thought they would be able to provide lots of input on the reason for even creating a anti-bullying situation, but that's good. I just wanted to know, and I'll move on that resolution.
Really good sound.
Okay, do we have a
Very good
seconder?
sound.
Oh,
Sherilyn, are you seconding? Or a question?
I'll
Sure.
second with a question.
Okay, question?
With your task force, is the parents or home and school aware of all this? And do you help or advocate, help the parents if their child or if they are being bullied? How is this working?
We don't have anybody from I'm not exactly sure what they're called, but like the parent teacher committee in schools, but we have been doing a fair amount of advertising in the local papers, on council's social media sites. We have flyers circulating. We also have flyers put up at different buildings in the community. I believe that parents are aware because I am being contacted by parents. And I have been since probably the springtime, and I was contacted again very recently by parents who want to share their experiences. We do have parents on the committee as well. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, if we're always recruiting for the task force. There are positions that still need to be filled. So my email is Jennifer Mount Pleasant, all lowercase, at sixnations.ca. My work phone is 519-770-6569. So you can always call me as well.
Just to follow up, Audrey.
Yes.
I know I second it, but I just maybe I missed it. I didn't have the terms of reference or whatever in the Dropbox, so I must have missed it. So I can't second it. Sorry.
Okay.
I don't know if everybody else did. Did everybody else get it?
I got it and I read it. What about the rest of you? Is there anyone else who, I guess, is prepared to second this, who has read the terms of reference over? Okay, so I don't have a seconder. I'll call again. Anybody else to second this?
Adriel seconded. It's Hazel.
Okay, so we have a mover. Who's our mover on that one?
I guess I moved it as well.
Well, you can't do both, Hazel.
I'm sorry, I'm just interrupted. I have these,
I understand. Okay, and
No
we're
way, I
looking for a
tried.
seconder. Seeing there are none, then what I'm going to do is refer this.
Can we make sure? Did everybody get them? I know you got them, Audrey. Greg, did you get them? I can't hear you. You're on mute.
No, I didn't get them. I didn't get them.
So can we
Can you-
ask, like, yeah, who hasn't got them? I haven't got them.
I haven't got them.
Anybody else?
Okay, then why don't we just do this? Brooke, would you please send those terms of reference out again to all counselors? And we'll defer this to our next meeting. Brooke,
Yes,
can you do that?
of course.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This one is being deferred. Okay, number 8 now. Is Chris here yet? Brooke,
He is not, no, sorry, he's not here.
can you give him an email or a quick call?
Yeah, absolutely. But
Thank
we
you.
do have Cynthia Jameson should be on the line for the OGD recommendation.
Okay, well, that one is coming up next, number 8. Okay, welcome Cynthia. Anybody else with you?
And Karen's there too.
Hi, Karen.
At least
Okay,
she was,
so
maybe she left. She had to
It-
take her granddaughter to the dentist, so. Oh, there she is, there she is. You're on
okay,
mute, Karen.
we have 8.1 recommendation. Cynthia, Karen, would you speak to that, please?
Karen, do you want me to address it in case you have to leave?
Yes, Cynthia.
Okay. If council doesn't mind, I'll address it. It's just Karen might have to leave to take her granddaughter to the dentist. What this is about is will be aware there are 4 Ongwedene Down governance documents. One is called the framework policy. One is the commission terms of reference, appendix 1. One is the memorandum understanding, appendix 2, and the other is the commission manual governance policies and orientation is appendix 3. Now, those documents have all been kicking around quite a few years, it would seem. I was researching and looking into it and actually approved in principle with a council motion in 2018. But what we did is review those documents because it's been 4 years since they were approved in principle prior to bringing it forward to council for final approval. And with final approval, council will also need to put an effective date, which of course would be April 1, 2023. And looking through, just to let you know, when I read through all those documents and researching, the way those 4 documents were structured was easily translate into Ongwedene Down being an incorporated entity. However, research also showed there was community consultation and there was strong support for a community commission, not to incorporate. But just so you know, a lot of these revisions we're going to recommend to you relate to that because it's set up that way, but we're not doing it. In total, there are 18 revisions. 8 of those revisions relate to reducing the size of the commission. Currently, there are 10 bodies make the full plate for the commission, but it's balanced. If you review, what you can see is it's a 5 and 5. 5 being from the community at large, and the other 5 being sectoral representation, that being 2 from elected council, 2 from cultural traditional, and 1 youth. So there's a weighting, as I said, 5 and 5. What's being recommended is a reduction, still keeping a weighting though, a weighting of 3 and 3. That is 3 from the community at large, 3 from the sectoral area. That would be 1 council, 1 cultural traditional, and still 1 youth. The reason for that, by and large, again, researching and talking with the folks who have been around, it appears we have not been able to reach the full complement for that commission. Part of the reason I have to believe for that is, and I did research it as well, is that the commission, it might be the only body on the territory, the commission members are not able to receive any honoraria. And it's not just because people, the organization is stingy and doesn't want to pay out. It's actually legislated. They cannot receive any sort of pay in return for their services on the commission. So we've not been too successful in that regard. By and large, that's the reason, and it affects 8 different areas of those documents. As I said, there's 4 of them, that reduction. So that's 8. Another recommendation or change is that the director would no longer report to the SAO. The director would report directly to the commission. The director would continue to report to council, but the words that were changed is it had the social services committee, but council has restructured so they no longer have committees. So the director would report directly to council itself. Another one of the changes is that after April 1st, if council approves these 4 governance documents, the commission will have the authority to revise their employment policy and their finance policy. They can never change the governance documents. They can recommend, but only with council's written approval can those documents be changed. So that's the other one, is that if the commission during the course of a year made a revision to, say, the employment policy or the finance policy, that change is valid. However, they're required to go to the annual general assembly and put it to the members, and it has to be either approved or not approved. So that's been changed. And the reason for that change is it doesn't seem very reasonable. That is, if the commission made a change to the employment policy, of course, they have to let the staff know. Then along comes the General Assembly, and guess what? I'm making this up now. They don't approve. Then they got to go back and tell the staff, oh, that's not the new policy after all. And the reason for that, I believe, being stated currently the way it is, again, remember I said it's fashioned as an organization or entity would fashion itself if it plans to become incorporated, which the commission will not. So that's another change. I think I pretty well covered them. Karen, I wasn't reading from this. Can you see any more that there's another composition of officials under that section. Just so you know, we would also change our post office box. Currently, we use the council's post office box 5,000, and it would become post office box 600. Oh, there's a couple of them. I don't even know why I counted them as 18. It's just renumbering. Like, for example, I said HIJ, and it might have 2 H's or 2 I's. And another change is the date the audit is due to council. Right now it says on or before June 5th. It's changed to June 30th, or as directed by the Six Nations and Grand River Council. And talking to Kara, she's our finance manager, she said generally what happens is council will send a notice out through its finance department of when the audit is due. I think pretty well I've covered that. Karen, did I leave anything out?
No, I think you covered everything. It really is just about updating the governance documents based on our current context and ensuring that we've got governance documents that are approved, fully approved, because they've only been approved in principle. Thanks, Cynthia. Are there any questions from any of the councillors? Okay, I have one from Greg.
Yes, hi. My question was just that was the previous governance model, was that more difficult to make decisions? Or would you find that this new governance model will streamline things a little bit better? That was my question.
Actually, the governance model itself hasn't changed. It's just the way it's set up and structured lends itself easily if the commission recommended and council agreed it could be incorporated. So it's really not changed. Just what's the big change as far as structure authority is that it does say in the documents that the commission can revise after you approve those documents. They can revise their policies. So the big change is instead of taking that to a general assembly to get, I guess, ratified, if you will, that's eliminated. That seems cumbersome, but I guess that's the way it would work if they were to incorporate.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I have a couple for you, Cynthia and Karen. One of the things that I did notice as I read through your operational policy is that a lot of it in there was using the John Carver model. In the last couple of years, we had updating and retraining in the John Carver model, and it's written in a positive way now. It's not written in the double negatives. Such as number 6, financial matters and conditions. The director will not operate without an operational plan that's developed. Well, that is written positively now, so they will operate with that plan. So I would suggest that you take a look at that and see if yours needs to be updated as well. And there's a few places throughout where you've given responsibilities to people. And it's about the commission director differential roles and responsibilities chart. Well, you've got a couple of things in there that you've put in, and there's nobody beside it who's responsible for it. So I suggest you might want to go back and take a look at that and plug in the people who are responsible for doing some of those activities.
I'm sorry, Audrey, what are you referring to?
I'm talking about your commission and director differential roles and responsibilities chart, where you have a commissioner director who are responsible for them. You've got little dots at the end of whose responsibility it is, commitment to teamwork.
Mhm.
So you might want to go through that, and there's I found at least 2 or 3 that didn't have anybody with them. So if you go through those charts again, that would be a good idea.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so have you been updated in the training of the John Carver model, your organization? Helen needs
I
to be
don't know,
let-
I'm pretty new here. For the Carver model, I must say, I don't mean to offend anyone. That Carver model has been around forever. And when it was first introduced into our community here, that was way back in the early 90s. Myself and many of the counselors totally did not agree with that model. That is, it did not, I'll just give you one example of why we found it not good. In that everything rested with the executive director. The staff had no call or recourse if they had an appeal to go on to another body. That was the main thing. But I realized that since those years, Audrey, a lot of work has been done to probably recognize some of the shortcomings and to make it more, I guess, something that would be responsive to our community.
Yeah, I'm just talking about that it be written in different language. The language is right now, you've got 2 double negatives being used. And
Not.
I sit on the board for the group to grip seal, and it's a little bit time intensive, but we went through the whole policies and changed
Yeah.
them from being double negatives to positive. The director will ensure, not will not.
Did we say not? I can't imagine us saying not.
Well, you say they will, yeah, it's a double negative, but if you read your policies. And yes, you have used the John Carver model through a bit
Okay.
of this, so. Anyway, has everybody else read this over, and do you have any
It's Sherilyn.
questions? Yeah, Sherilyn.
I think that council needs to have a wholesome discussion ourselves in regarding this, because they want this to be in effect in April of next year, these changes. And I think council needs to decide or what's going on and what direction that OGD is going in. So I would like to defer it and for council to have a wholesome discussion regarding this. It's my suggestion.
Okay, do we have a motion for that effect? Sherilyn?
I don't know how others will feel, but
Okay. how
Sure,
does the
if you need it.
feel? We'll find out if they agree, because I think this really has to be looked at. I think we need to get our lawyers to look at it too. If this, you can't change some of this stuff. We got to make sure that it's done right so that our community is taken care of. And I'm sure they've done a great job, but there's some things that can be tweaked. Michelle, I see your hand up.
I would agree with you. I was just going to offer, can this be put on the agenda for Wednesday or Thursday? I really don't know what the agenda looks like. But this is very important, and I know that OGD is here because there are timelines. So if we can have that council discussion this week, that would be ideal.
Good suggestion. Greg?
Yes, I agree as well. Personally, I just like a little bit more time to review it again and go through some of the steps or the changes. But that was just my feeling. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so Sherilyn, are you making that motion to defer it to Wednesday's meeting? And Tammy, can we add this to the agenda for council? Guess we'll start with Tammy first.
I don't even have an agenda.
Tammy, Brooke, are you there?
Yep, Tammy said yeah.
Okay, so that's a yes.
I'll move.
Pardon me?
I'll move for it to be deferred and to be discussed on this week.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? All right, motion carried. Waive second reading.
I'll move.
Sherilyn, thank you. Seconder?
Second.
Thank you, Greg. All in favor? Tammy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to be clear for clarification. Is it just this recommendation that you want to discuss this week on the agenda?
Yeah, but we want the supporting
Okay.
documents that we want to go through.
Okay, I just want to be clear. Thanks.
You're very welcome. All, I guess motion carried. Okay, Cynthia.
Audrey, for Wednesday, I'm not sure how you operate. I heard the council say they would like to have an internal discussion, which is good, but are Karen and I to be present for that as well?
Sheridan, are you having it as a council discussion?
Yes, just council.
Just council, Cynthia. Thank you for
Okay.
offering.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. All right, so we'll move on to the next one. Oh, Chris is here, right?
I am.
Oh, wonderful. Chris, welcome. We will look forward to your presentation on housing.
Great.
Thanks. And you introduce yourself, I guess, so that speakers or the viewers at home will know who you are and why you're here.
Okay, will do. So good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Hoyos. I'm the Director of Policy and Communications at the Chiefs of Ontario. Our sector, Policy Comms, we also cover the housing file. So we work with the Chiefs Committee on Housing and Infrastructure, and we participate on some of the AFN committees just to collect information and what have you. So I can just maybe just get right into the presentation. It kind of goes over some of the initial aspects of it and kind of what COO's mandate is around housing here. So let me just share my screen. Right, there we are. Can everyone see that okay? Yeah, good to go. All right, great. Okay, so the main issue I'm here to talk about, and what I've been doing engagement on for about a couple of years now, is this concept of transfer of care and control. And so it's pretty straightforward, and it's very similar to a lot of other processes in different sectors. But basically, what's going on here? Indigenous Services Canada is mandated to transfer control of housing and related infrastructure programs to First Nations. And so this is pretty much the same in most sectors, as I said, most other programs and services. BISC has basically said they want to get out of the business of providing programs and services. They just want to be there to transfer the funding and have First Nations basically, decide how they want to spend it in each of the sectors. So housing and infrastructure is kind of going through this process right now. There are no specific timelines. It's not like ISC is like really trying to, make this happen at any particular speed. The different regions are taking their time, going at their own pace, so to speak. So British Columbia is probably going the fastest. They'll probably be done in about 2 years or so. Quebec has basically said, it will be a minimum 10 years before they're ready to get anything like this done. Based on some of the conversations that I've had with the chief so far, there's a lot of prerequisites that need to be met in Ontario before anyone's really willing to negotiate this. So my conservative guess would probably be something about 10, 15 years as well in Ontario, but we're kind of just getting people used to this idea and kind of plodding along as we go. Okay, so the Chiefs of Ontario mandate.
Excuse me, Chris.
Yep.
How much money is being given to the First Nations in Ontario to look at their housing?
So I'm not exactly sure if there's actually any funding being provided to the First Nations directly. I'm not sure if there are First Nations who have actually reached out and asked. I know of Six Nations, for instance, if you guys were interested in doing some of this work, ISC would probably be very interested in providing you guys funding to do your own work on this. Like some of the stuff that we're doing it's very high level. It's very like regional sort of approach, but I'll get into it a little bit later. And what we basically asked Indigenous Services is, hey, it's pretty obvious that, there isn't going to be a one size fits all regional approach to this. The large First Nations are going to want to do their own thing. The PTOs are going to want to do their own thing. Is there going to be funding for them to do that? And I think the answer has been yes. So that's the direction we're headed. So our mandate for this in
Excuse me,
2020. Yep, go ahead.
we have another question from Greg.
Go ahead.
Oh, hi, Chris. I just had a couple questions. I just wanted to back it up a little bit. There, in one of your reports, you said there was a need of about 7.6 billion or something like that. Was that correct? In that the ISC was going to give you about 3 billion. Is that not correct? Is that what was the amount that was settled on?
Okay, so I wish. I wish there was 3 billion. So there's the need in Ontario is about 4.4 billion. That's a very conservative estimate based on a survey that was done in 2018, 2019. So that's before the pandemic. And quite frankly, I don't think it captured all the housing and related infrastructure needs. The survey was pretty basic. And a lot of the responses we found weren't necessarily educated sort of or well-researched responses from some of the communities. So I would say it's probably quite a bit bigger than that. So something around the 7 billion that you stated. But in terms of the funding provided by ISC, Indigenous Services Canada provides Ontario about $100 million a year in housing funding. There was an additional 3 billion nationally. And then when you kind of break that down, nationally over 5 years. So when you kind of break that down year by year, and Ontario specific, you're looking at maybe about an additional 70 to 100 million. So pretty significant increase. It's about a 100% increase, but still nowhere near covering what the needs are. If you look at that number, 4.4 billion, or let's say 5 billion, it would still take over 20 years to fill the housing gap at the current rate of spending. So yeah, nowhere close to the need.
Yeah, just a follow-up question.
Yes.
So how, Chris, how are these amounts negotiated? Is it just come down from ISC? This is what they're going to give?
Yep.
Or do we have input and say, hey, this is far below what the need is, do you negotiate, say, like I was saying, if it was 3 billion given to Canada, can we go back and say, no, we'd rather have 5 billion? Or do they just kind of dictate the amounts?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a process there. So AFN will usually put forward a pre-budget submission, basically articulating what the need is nationally, and then there is breakdowns within that that show how much the need is for Ontario. Our job basically is to ensure that that need is at least reflective of Ontario's needs. I think within ISK's last pre-budget submission, they had stated there was about a need of 60 billion nationally. That's since gone up to about 130, 140 billion for this fiscal. So that's the pre-budget submission that they're going to put in for this fiscal. But for last fiscal, or it was, yeah, like I said, 60 billion. Of that, Ontario's portion was about 70 billion. They had included another factor in there, which we typically don't, which is migration. They kind of they pulled that number out of kind of thin air, as far as I'm concerned. They basically said, you know, if 20% of the people want to come back to live on reserve, then that means we just add 20% on. And so that's where they got that somewhat inflated number. But in any case, the way the process kind of works, AFN puts forward that pre-budget submission. ISK takes a look at that. Then they bring that to the federal cabinet. The cabinet sort of decides, and Treasury decides, you know, what the funding allocation is going to be. And then ISK pretty much, ISK headquarters gives ISK Ontario region a certain amount of funding, and then ISK Ontario region divvies it up, right? Generally, the way that's done, and the way that 3 billion that you had mentioned earlier, how that's been divided, it's really just up to ISK Ontario region. They decided it was going to be proposal based, with priority given to shovel ready projects. You know, for larger First Nations like Six Nations, you know, it's a bit of more of a favorable process. If you're looking at you know, much smaller communities that don't necessarily have the capacity to, you know, put together those proposals and be shovel ready all the time and what have you, it's a very difficult process. But in any case, that AFN and Chiefs of Ontario, we really don't have any sort of input on how that funding gets spent. The programs and services are pretty standardized at CMHC and at ISK. You know, there's a long list of maybe about 20 or so different programs in housing that can be applied for at any given sort of time. And you know, some for repairs, some for new builds, you know, some for infrastructure, some for housing retrofits, all that kind of stuff. But I think that the purpose of this process, the transfer of care and control, is that First Nations would basically decide on how the money gets spent. They would get, you know, funding for a specific amount of time, let's say 5 years, 10 years, what have you, and then they would spend it as they needed. That amount would also be negotiated directly with the First Nation or the PTO, so that they, you know, so at least it would resemble somewhat the need. At this point, yeah, we asked for, you know, as I said, AFN asked for 60 billion. Now it's going to be 130 billion. I think across the board, all infrastructure, including water, including, you know, civil infrastructure, all that kind of stuff, AFN is asking for $340 billion, something along those lines, which amounts to pretty much all of Canada's tax revenue in 1 year. So I don't think we're probably going to get that, but it's to show Canada that this is what the need is, and it's been neglected for so long that it's amounted to this. You know, if this was an issue that you took care of as you went, it wouldn't have led to such a massively inflated price tag. So that's kind of the process.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, Greg?
No, that's good. Thank you.
No. Hazel, I see your hand is up, then Lillian.
Yeah, I just want to comment on some of the information that Chris has provided. I guess I am unable to get excited about any amount of money and the words transfer from ISK. It's almost like they want to hand down all that they're doing, but they always want to keep control of the dollars. And when you mention about shovel-ready projects, we've had a shovel-ready project for Gowanio School for about the last 5, 6, 7 years. And then they start changing conditions on the proposal, change the drawings, change. And as recent as a couple of weeks ago, things had to be changed again. And I told them, if you had provided the funding years ago, when it was 12 grand to build a school, then it grew to 18 million, and now it's up to 31.5 million.
Wow.
And nothing has ever, they keep having, I think they got a bag of tricks and delays. When anybody talks about something being shovel ready, they're nowhere near to getting any money from them. I guess experience and what I've learned by watching, being in these meetings, I have little expectation of us getting the amount of money we will ever need to deal with our housing here. And if they're going to give a big lump sum to First Nations, of course, they're going to disperse it by that percentage that each reserve gets, and Six Nations being the largest don't get nowhere near what they need. I think, I don't know if when money is assigned also, like they need to have their administration fees taken by ISK. So I don't know, I feel disappointed with ISK. Let's just put it that way. Thank you.
Oh, thanks,
Yeah,
Councillor. I think that's pretty much the sentiment across the board. And I think, you know, I'll get into it a little bit in the presentation, but there is a lot of apprehension around this transfer of care and control. I don't think anyone really, you know, wants to take on a broken system, right? The chiefs have called it managing our own poverty, right? No one's interested in getting blamed for the housing problems and lack of housing funding, because now, you know, First Nations are in charge of the programs and services. So, you know, your communities start blaming you when the housing programs and services aren't enough and aren't working properly, right? Whereas it was ISK and Canada created this broken system, all these problems. So, you know, what we've compiled and put together is a list of prerequisites that need to happen. So criteria basically that need to be met before, you know, really Ontario First Nations are ready to engage in any kind of transfer. And one of them is filling the housing gap. So filling that $4.4 billion gap. And another is making sure that, you know, that all the infrastructure is put in place. So making sure that there's service lots, so sewage, hydro, roads, broadband, all those kinds of things. Another is making sure that the ATR process is fixed, right? Because you can't build new subdivisions or new homes if you know, you can't add land to your reserve in any kind of way. So, you know, we've kind of looked at all these kind of things and said, you know what, ISK, this transfer can't happen yet. There are so many other things that need to be fixed first. Like, you can't just hand over a broken system to the First Nations, right? It's just not going to work. And that's been the message as well from some of the other regions, like Quebec region has also said that as well. There's some regions that say, well, you know, like BC, for instance, they say, well, you know what, we're going to take over control of this because we can do a better job and we're going to do it now. And then we'll fix the problem ourselves because ISK isn't going to fix it. But, you know, I think it's really, you know, up to the chiefs on how they want to proceed with this. Is there any other questions? Sorry, I can't see.
I have Liliane Mount Pleasant. Next.
Good morning, everybody. Chris, if you may not know, I'm the acting director here at Housing on Six Nations at the moment. I just have some questions, and sorry if you're going to get to this later in your presentation, about particularly like undispersed funds. Like when we look at a block funding model, you have say 5-10 years worth of funding that's given to you, and your nation essentially gets to disperse the funds per year as they see fit. But what happens to those funds that aren't dispersed or aren't spent at the end of the period? Because what we hear a lot from ISC and from CMHC in particular is that Six Nations is accessing a lot of funding that other nations fall through on. So it'll be allocated to another First Nation. They have a particular timeline in which to spend it. They don't spend it, it gets pulled back, and then Housing or Six Nations has the option to access it. So we do access a lot of additional funding through that. I'm wondering how the block funding method is going to change that, because you say have 5 years, and then what happens to that money if ISC pulls it back?
So with the block funding model, all that basically ISC's response to a lot of these questions is that'll have to be negotiated, right? So if you do want to have this block funding for housing and infrastructure, and you want to start doing your own housing and infrastructure programs and services, you would have to really negotiate that with ISC probably over the course of like at least a year or so. Like this would be a long process that you would have to undertake with ISC, and you would go through line by line and figure out how all that would work. I would say I do remember vaguely them saying that they would allow you to roll that funding over. I can follow up with that for you, make sure that I'm right in what I'm remembering, because I've had this conversation with ISC like 100 times. But yeah, I'll get back to you to see if you can roll it over. But I think really at the end of the day, it'll be, each agreement will be different, right? So Six Nations will probably go at it alone. That'd be my guess. But then there's PTOs that are also going to be interested in doing this. Anishinaabe Nation is looking at it. Treaty 3 is looking at it. And they'll probably have different agreements, different arrangements, different negotiations. So, yeah.
Okay, any other questions? All right, Chris, will you continue on, please, with your presentation?
Okay, sounds good. So in 2020, the Chiefs of Ontario was given a mandate via resolution to do this engagement on the transfer of care and control of housing and infrastructure. So this was followed up with a bit of funding from ISC in 2021. We were given about $150,000 to conduct this engagement, hire consultants, hire on a housing manager, and try and or a housing policy advisor, and try and figure this out. And so we started in 2021 with a couple engagement sessions. We had 4 housing workshops and a housing summit. So the housing workshops, initially were just supposed to be on transfer of care and control, but the Chiefs basically let us know, hey, listen, we want to talk about a lot more than that. So it's around the overall theme was this transfer of care and control, and the first workshop we had was specific to that. But then we also got into some of the immediate housing needs, data sharing and governance, financing and economic development. So there's a lot of things that were discussed there. And then that culminated in a housing sovereignty summit on October 14th, 2021. Again, that provided an opportunity for chiefs and technicians to give us a bit of their ideas on how this transfer of care and control could occur. We wrapped all that up into a what we heard document, which was presented to the Chiefs in Assembly in 2021, and then again in summer 2022 at the ACA. Following this sort of phase 1 of engagement, we developed what I wanted to talk to you guys about today, which is this options paper. So this options paper was developed in cooperation with the Ontario First Nations Technical Services Corporation and the Chiefs Committee on Housing and Infrastructure. Much of it was based on dialogue from the workshops and the summit in 2021. And then after being approved by that committee, the Chiefs Committee, a draft was provided to the Chiefs in Assembly at the ACA in June. So if you remember from last June, Chief Merkel also provided a presentation to the Chiefs at the time. Okay, so before I get into the actual description of the options themselves, as I mentioned earlier, you know, there's several prerequisites that really need to be met. So certain criteria that really would need to be met before transfer could be considered. And this is based on, you know, some of that early engagement. This is what we heard time and time again. One was filling the housing backlog. So as I said, you know, there's that 4.4 billion. You know, at the current rate of spending, it's going to take at least 22 years before that housing backlog, to be filled. You know, the rate of population growth on reserve versus the amount of funding that we get, we're falling back, like we're falling into the hole as we go, right? I mean, we're getting farther and farther behind. The second piece is ensuring that the infrastructure is in place. So specifically those service lots. So making sure that there's access to hydro, electrical, roads, sewage. And then finally, there's, you know, these structural changes that need to occur. So the federal additions to reserve policy, you know, tax regimes at the provincial level, all these kinds of things are major impediments to this transfer and to getting a solid housing program on reserve. Now, there's about 3 here listed on the PowerPoint. I think there's about 10 or 12 in the options paper, but these were the big ones. These are the ones that we heard time and time again. Okay, so here's the first option, but before we get into it, I would just like to say, you know, when we were putting these options together, we knew that several of the options were likely to be very unpopular. We decided to include them anyway, basically to ensure that we're providing a full spectrum, a full range of options to the Chiefs. We didn't want to be overly prescriptive and try to assume what it was that the Chiefs want. So, you know, this option, for instance, is a pretty basic, you know, housing authority model. It's probably not going to be what happens in Ontario. In fact, we just had a resolution passed, and I'll get into that towards the end of the presentation. There was a resolution passed at the last Fall Chiefs Assembly, and it basically indicates to us that this is not what's going to be happening in Ontario. But the way this model is set out, basically it's your average sort of housing authority model. It looks like Quebec and BC will probably be going down this route. The idea here is that you have one housing office that signs a funding agreement with ISK, one housing office for all Ontario, that signs an agreement with ISK and then allocates housing funding to each of the First Nations based on whatever formula they decide. The housing office would have representatives from each of the PTOs and large First Nations who would negotiate with ISK and then negotiate amongst themselves on how to distribute the funding. So we did a bit of a cost benefit analysis for each of the models. I'm not going to get into too much detail. This model was already voted down by the Chiefs, but it's a pretty straightforward idea. Like I said, you know, you have one office that then distributes all the funding and decides, you know, housing programs and services for all of the First Nations. So this is option 2. It's a regional housing organization style model. It's called the Board of Representatives model. So during our initial engagement, it was pretty clear that leadership, you know, preferred PTOs and large First Nations to have a more direct control or direct role when it came to housing programs and funding. This option takes that into account. So basically, in this option, each region and large First Nation would be responsible for developing their own approach to the transfer of care and control. So, like I said, you know, Six Nations would have their own thing, you know, the different PTOs would have their own thing, and basically they would figure it out all out on their own. Membership, you know, to these housing organizations would be based on whatever they want. So it could be, like I said, PTO, geographical region, large First Nation, treaty area. The Chiefs would basically figure all that out on their own. And then ISK would reach out, or they would reach out to ISK, and they would, you know, initiate this transfer of care control. ISK, you know, initially said they weren't very open to this concept. They wanted basically this one housing authority for all of Ontario, but we were very adamant that that would never work in Ontario. You know, there's never going to be just one housing authority in Ontario. The large First Nations are definitely going to want to do this on their own. The PTOs are definitely going to want to do this on their own. So, you know, after some negotiation, they decided, okay, we're open to the concept. Now, I suspect it's going to have to be a reasonable number of housing organizations. I don't think they're going to be willing to consider 133 housing organizations for all of Ontario. I think, the large First Nations are probably going to be able to do it themselves, but other than that, there's going to have to be other aggregates. So, like I said, each regional housing organization would be responsible for negotiating funding agreements directly with ISK, and then independently delivering their own programs and services. Now, once that's sort of set up and accomplished, we would work to set up, some kind of organizational structures at the Ontario level. One of these organizational structures could be something like this Board of Representatives. Pretty straightforward, pretty simplistic. The idea here is that all of the different housing authorities or housing organizations in Ontario would send a rep to sit at this Board of Representatives. But just to be clear, this board wouldn't have any authority over the different housing organizations. Basically, it would just be an advocacy body that would, advocate making sure that Ontario gets its fair share of funding. So, we hear this time and time again in a lot of different sectors that Ontario doesn't get its fair share of funding when it comes to housing. It doesn't get its fair share of housing funding when it comes to a bunch of other issues. Ontario has 25% of the First Nations population in Canada, but you'll see usually the funding levels are appropriate for about 17%. So there does need to be some Ontario level advocacy, and a Board of Representatives might be something that could do that kind of work. Okay, so moving on, we have option 3. So this is the resource hub model. Very similar to option 2. You can see in this model, the bottom piece is basically just the same, but you've got this added top piece, the resource hub. So again, leadership would decide how they want to organize themselves into developing these housing organizations, either by PTO, geographic area, treaty, large First Nation, what have you. Again, a Board of Representatives would be set up to do that advocacy work, making sure that Ontario is getting its fair share of housing funding. But the board would also oversee a resource hub that would support the regional organizations and support the different housing organizations within Ontario. We found that there would probably be some gaps, in terms of the services that some of the smaller housing organizations could deliver. Things like housing manager training programs, financial literacy programs, best practices, all that kind of stuff. That could all be done by a resource hub. But also one major task that they could, take care of would be the collection and storage of housing data. This would likely benefit from an Ontario-wide approach for a number of reasons. ISK and the Treasury, they're much more likely to respond better to budget submissions that are at least Ontario-wide in scope. There's a lot more negotiating power when all of Ontario comes together and says, this is what Ontario needs for all of Ontario. This is what this is what the deficit is. This is how much we are in terms of the housing backlog. If each of the housing organizations are trying to do this on their own, trying to do budget submissions on their own and provide their own data, it's much easier for Canada to just sort of brush them aside and make excuses. Someone had brought up earlier this shovel-ready project that's been ready for 6 years or what have you. It's much easier for Canada to sort of brush that aside and ignore one First Nation. But when the First Nations all come together in Ontario and put forward their budget submission and say, hey, this is what's missing, this is what's owed, it's more likely to get a response. So we find that the resource hub and this Board of Representatives could sort of fill that advocacy gap and be responsible for data sharing and data collection. So option 4 is a completely decentralized approach. So again, this is a very similar model to the last two, but in this model, there's no overarching organization. So there's no Board of Representatives. There's no resource hub. Basically, Chiefs of Ontario will just let Indigenous Services Canada know. There's not going to be any kind of overarching organizations. The large First Nations want to go alone. The PTOs want to go alone. Just reach out to them and they'll tell you what they need, right? might be some challenges with this, you know, as I said, when it comes to advocacy work, when it comes to data collection and all those kinds of things. Canada can play that divide and conquer game. You know, when communities try and go at it completely alone, or PTOs try and go at it completely alone, Canada, you know, can kind of move its weight. You know, they're a large economy. They're, you know, they've got their lawyers, they got this and that and the other, and they can push First Nations around a little bit more. So decentralized approach is also still an option, but not necessarily suggested. And then finally, we have the status quo. So this was also brought to the chiefs as being an option, basically just letting Canada know that we're not ready to make a decision at this point. That we, you know, that Indigenous Services Canada and the CMHC should just continue providing the programs and services as they are for the foreseeable future, and that, you know, maybe we can talk about it later. There is a potential benefit that we kind of saw here, that being, you know, British Columbia, Quebec, and Atlantic region are moving ahead with this, you know, and we could maybe observe, you know, and learn from their successes and failures, and then, you know, try this again in 5 years or what have you. But in any case, we did a ton of engagement on this options paper. We reached out to pretty much all the leadership councils for all the PTOs, so Association of Iroquois Island Indians. We went to 4 Chiefs Council meetings for Anishinaabe Nation. We went to the Chiefs Committee on Housing and Infrastructure at Anishinaabe Aski Nation. We brought this to the Leadership Council as well. We brought it to Grand Chief Abram Benedict as well as Chief Hill. So we did a substantial political engagement, and then we also reached out to a lot of technical groups. So the different housing technicians and executive directors for all the PTOs. We also brought this to the Chiefs in Assembly in June, and then finally we brought it to the Chiefs in Assembly again last month. So last month, this is a bit of an older PowerPoint, my apologies, but last month we did bring it to the Chiefs in Assembly. They passed a resolution, and if you look at options 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5, basically they told us, okay, I guess let me back it up just a little bit here. The resolution wasn't to actually choose an option and go ahead with it. All we wanted to know was, is there any enough interest in one of these options that we should build it out a little bit more? So if you look at these options, they're pretty rudimentary, right? You know, OFN TSC helped us out with this, but I mean, they're very straightforward. They're not, you know, really fully built out. They're not fully costed. If you look through the options paper, again, pretty rudimentary. We wanted to keep it simple so that, you know, it'd be easy to understand the different models and what have you. Very straightforward stuff. But now that we're getting into later stages, we really need to build these models out. So what we asked the chiefs was, you know, which of these models would you like for us to build out? It doesn't mean we're going to implement the model. All it means is we're going to seek a little bit of more funding from ISK, you know, another $100,000 or what have you, and then get a high-end consulting firm. We're probably looking at the Institute for Fiscal Studies and Democracy to really build out that model and see what it would look like. Then we'll bring it back to the chiefs and see if that's something that they want to do. But basically the message we got from the chiefs was, we're not interested in option 1, so scratch that out. The centralized housing office. We're not interested in option 5, the status quo, because we need to do something. So what we want to see is built out option 2, 3, and 4. So that's what the resolution says. Go get some more money from ISK and really build out those 3 models and bring it back to us once they're fully costed, you know, and we've had some time to review it. So basically that's our next step. We're going to seek a little bit more funding from ISK, get you know, a high-end consultant firm to really build those models out, think about all the different contingencies, and then we're going to go back to engaging with everybody. We'll come back to you guys and then all the PTOs, all the leadership, and start to get their feedback on how we should be moving forward. So that's my presentation, and happy to answer any other questions.
Okay, I see that we have Greg's hand is up.
Yeah, hi, Chris. The the question I had is if BC, Quebec, and Atlantic go out on their own, do they negotiate their own funding amounts directly with ISC? Or is it still under the AFN negotiating tactics, I guess? Because that's my question is that if any region goes out on their own, do they individually negotiate the amounts for funding?
Yeah, pretty much. So they'll negotiate directly with ISC if they have a centralized housing authority. Quebec will have likely a centralized housing authority, with the exception probably of James Bay, right? James Bay will probably be doing their own thing. BC will have one centralized authority, and they will be negotiating directly with ISC. Now, AFN might still do some advocacy at the national level. So when they say, you know, the housing backlog is $130 billion, they may include the data that they get from BC. If they reach out to BC and say, hey, can we include your data in our overall ask, they might still do that. You know, and that's sort of, you know, advocating through two streams. BC would be negotiating and AFN would be advocating. But yeah, they would have a direct line essentially with ISC to negotiate directly exactly how much funding they're getting. Yeah.
So our negotiating body now for everyone is AFN.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, so we actually just got a resolution in June mandating Chiefs of Ontario to do a pre-budget submission for housing and infrastructure and go on a lobby for housing and infrastructure. At the time, well, it was primarily infrastructure. At the time, we didn't have the numbers needed. They wanted it for this fiscal, and we just didn't have the numbers to pull together a pre-budget submission in about a month and a half, because the deadline was October 4th, and we just couldn't do it in that timeline. So what we're looking at is for next fiscal, we'll be doing a pre-budget submission for all of Ontario when it comes for housing and infrastructure. So we'll have our own stream for Ontario, and AFN will be doing their own as well. But yeah, AFN's pretty much the only one doing it right now.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions? Just looking down my list here.
Oh, we got Councillor Helen.
Okay, Helen, please.
No, I just want to thank Chris for coming and do the presentation. I've been sitting on that committee, as he knows. I started late, but I've been sitting there like last fall and all this year. So I'm glad that he come and explained it, because he did a lot better job than what I could do. But I do write my reports. It's different when it's done in person. So I'm glad that you've done that. And I really am advocating for Six Nations to do their own housing authority. And I really think, I know we're saying it's not going to happen. It could be 10 years, it could be whatever, but I really think Six Nations needs to sit down and start looking at what is it that we want? What kind of a model do we want? And then we can take our time developing such a model rather than having to rush and do it. Maybe because I'm not moving too fast or whatever. So that's what I'm going to be promoting to council.
Okay, now Helen, anyone else with questions? Okay.
I have a question, Audrey.
Yes.
No, I just wanted to comment on what Helen is saying, and I also think that we need to take our time and develop our own. It just seems like this is sort of a rushing matter where ISC is wanting to download some of their work again. So I think I agree with what Helen's saying, that we will take our time and develop our own housing authority. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Councillor. And I think that's pretty much been the message that we've been giving to ISC, you know, is that, you know, the large First Nations are going to be doing what they got to do, right? Treaty 3 is definitely doing what they got to do. When people start to have things set up, then we can maybe talk about some, you know, Ontario level organization or some, you know, Ontario level structures that could help for advocacy, that could help for, you know, a couple other things. But really, ISC needs to start going to large First Nations, needs to start going to the treaty areas, the PTOs to have those conversations. So that's been our message.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, for your presentation. It was really informative. We appreciate it. So on our
Thanks,
delegation, you're very welcome. Chris Hoyes, Director of Policy and Communications, provide the Chiefs of Ontario Housing and Infrastructure update. So he did that, which was wonderful. The recommendation 4.1, whereas November 8, 2022, Councillor Helen Miller provided an update at General Council on what she heard at a meeting of the Chiefs of Ontario Committee regarding housing, and whereas it was requested that the Chiefs of Ontario be requested to provide a presentation on the options paper on the transfer of care and control of housing and related infrastructure programs to First Nations. And whereas the presentation was originally scheduled for Monday, November 14th, political liaison, however, the Chiefs of Ontario representative was not able to attend, and it was rescheduled for today, December 12th. So therefore, be it resolved that the Six Nations of the Grand River Elected Council accept as information the presentation on the options paper on the transfer of care and control of housing and related infrastructure programs to First Nations provided by Chris Hoyes, Chiefs of Ontario. Do I have a mover for this, please? Helen, mover, do I have a seconder?
I'll second Hazel.
Hazel, seconder. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Seeing no opposition, motion carried. Now, so waive second reading on this. So Helen and
Second.
second,
I'll second.
and Hazel, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Seeing there are none, motion carried. Thank you very much for that. That was very informative.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so now we're back on okay, we deferred number 8. Now we're on number 9. Community Services and Support Director reports. Parks and Recreation, is Cheryl here? Or are we just reading her report?
He is not here.
Okay, well, the report was in the Dropbox. I hope everyone read it. And could I have a mover for her report, please? I read it very detailed like she normally does. Mover, please.
I'll move. Audrey.
Thank you, Hazel. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second Audrey.
Thanks, Carrie. All in favor?
Favor.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Okay, councillor reports. Does anyone have any reports to give? Okay, seeing Hazel?
Audrey, I have one typed out. I had another one, but I need to put it in a report form before I send it out. And again, what I want to ask the question, when we complete these reports, who do you send it directly to?
Hey, Tammy, do you have an answer for us?
Yes, you can send it directly to Brooke, and then Brooke usually shares it out with the admin staff. And then what we are beginning to do is look at them and see if there's recommendations. If there's recommendations in those reports, then if there's any work that admin needs to do, we share that with the admin. That way, when the report gets added to the council agenda, then some of the work has already started. So for an example, Greg had shared a couple of reports with me. And so what we're planning on doing is adding those to the Dropbox so council can review them, but knowing that they're going to be hopefully within a couple of weeks, add it to the appropriate council agenda for the follow-up action.
Thank you very much, Tammy.
Okay.
Greg, for you, then Helen.
Audrey, I was going to read my report.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to put it in another format. Go
No,
ahead.
this one is done properly. I was just waiting to.
I apologize.
Okay.
Take it away.
This was a meeting on November the 9th, and it was the Six Nations Palliative Care Residential Hospice Project Team meeting. And in attendance was Lois Bumbry, Janet Gasparelli, Alana Hill, Vince Longboat, Darren Jameson, and myself. Just to note that Melba also sits on this committee, and she had problems connecting to this meeting because it was that Teams connection. And just a short note here, I think we all need to have a information session on how to join those teams and not have difficulty joining a meeting. So Melba was unable to get in that day due to that problem. The agenda items dealt with the construction update and the communication with the donor for that building, the project manager update, Ontario Health meeting, another. The key highlights from that meeting were as follows. Vince Longboat reported that he had been in contact with the donor. He learned that he had assigned this project to, I'm not sure who, must be a new employee that he has, but the name given was Brenda Johnson, effective November the 3rd, 22. He informed Vince that this project had 12 other projects now in front of it. He received verbal confirmation from the donor to input a laneway at the construction site on 4th line next to the Burger Barn, along with a sign and start of the geotechnical assessment. However, Vince is to wait for a written agreement prior to starting any work on this site. Vince will try to get a call arranged for Darren to speak with the donor. Vince to work with Darren regarding the numbers for property and cost estimate for hospice building. Vince has the size and expected cost of the building from the proposal from True North Company. I think that's like a log company. Janet Gasparelli suggested having all the needed terms in the agreement laid out for Brenda and Glenn to expedite the initiation of getting the infrastructure specs moving and timelines confirmed. Lois, the coordinator, reported the developed the O&M policies and procedures for and the job description for I'm not sure what that job description was called and who it was actually for. There was discussion on contingency plan of capital funding for the hospice if the donor does not continue with project build. Discussion on Ontario Health capital funding if needed, or the possibility of a community donation for the capital. They have to find capital for that building, and further discussion on this may occur. Need for a letter of recommendation from the Six Nations Council to send with revised operations proposal to Ontario Health. This is to be done as soon as possible. Council update is being completed along with revisions to the operations proposal. So that action would have been that the Six Nations of the Grand River Council will be asked to provide a letter of recommendation to accompany the revised operations proposal. And that would be a task for Janet Gasparelli, who is the lead on that. And that's the end of the report. Thanks.
Yeah, well, appreciate the report. Any questions about Hazel's report?
It's Melba Audrey.
Okay, first of all, I have Greg, Sherry Lynn, Helen, and Melba. Greg.
Yes, I'm going to be supplying everyone with a written report on the AFN meeting. I didn't get there until the last 2 days. I remember that the first day, what I understand was mainly procedural confirmation of procedural steps in their dealing with resolutions. There was fairly amount of resolutions to be looked at in past, but I think they got through, and Jill can correct me if I'm wrong. I think they got through about 8 or 9 of them. And I will supply them. They're quite lengthy. They have a lot of sections in each one. I will provide those to the council members, either through Brooke or through your mailbox. A couple of comments that I do have to make is concerning the talk from Minister of Indigenous Relations, Mark Miller. He actually, the chief stood up and did a very eloquent speech about his interference in our case. And of course, the minister, he kind of refuted, back down a little bit, but not much. He said he was asked by them to go to that meeting. I don't believe he understood who he was meeting with, first of all, because I know there were some chiefs that were not present at that meeting. He also mentioned something about the Haudenosaunee asking RCMP for help, and I didn't think that was correct. I think he got that wrong. So I think he just tried to cover his behind a little bit, and but he said from now on that he will inform us of any further meetings. Some of the other comments from Minister Haydu was that CHRT update concerning that 22 billion and 2 billion going to housing, and it not a lot of substance there, but all that'll be in my report, my comments about the various ministers speaking. Again, not a lot of substance, even when the Prime Minister spoke. But anyway, you'll get that in a written form. Any questions, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg. We appreciate that. Look forward to reading your report. Okay, Sherry Lynn.
Mine was about, I had some questions regarding, I thought that's what we were doing regarding Hazel's report. Just a couple of things. This building that they're building, is it, so if it's true north and it's I guess it's a cabin, like log?
Log home, yeah.
Okay, so how big, I guess how big is it, and are we able to build onto it if it's a log one? And is it really accessible for palliative care?
Well, what I can say about that, Sherry, is that this was the developed layout when this all began a few years ago. Remember when that offer came in from the donor, they proceeded to come up with drawings what the building would look like. So yeah, I know that a log home can be added on to, because I know people who have done it with that own log homes. Of course, it would have to be accessible for everyone, because you can't build a building with stairs in, because, you know, people that are in palliative care, they have no access at all, and their family, you know, they could be elders and whatever, so.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad to see it's going, but I guess the concerning thing that you said, it's 12th in line, and we've already been waiting 3 years. The donor's been waiting 3 years, and we're 12th in line. Is that what I heard?
That's what you heard. And the reason that was like that, and that's what I said, they keep talking about the location. I says, no wonder it's delayed, because if you keep changing your mind and going and looking for another location, he probably maybe was frustrated with the delay. That's what I'm thinking, but I can't say for sure. So I think it's back on track. That's what I want to say, because it is very much needed. And I think there's a lot, like some of the people that have worked on this initially, I think has been the reason for this big long delay now, because the original people that started to work on it are hardly associated with it, because they've been removed from that area. So I have to say, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but I think it's top heavy with management, and there's too many people you got to go through, and it's bottom line, I think that's what the problem is. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Hazel, for sharing your thoughts with us. Okay, we have Helen next.
Yeah, I'm along the lines of Sherry Lynn. I mean, this was approached almost over a year ago, 2 years ago. We should have moved on it. There was even land offered, but they didn't want that land. They wanted different land.
Yeah.
So we should have moved on it right away because people are, people that have money to donate to something, they're not going to sit around waiting forever.
Yeah.
And then other people come along and they have projects, and then somebody else has a project. So you end up 12 projects in a row. Maybe if we'd have done it right away, we would have been the first project or the second. We just keep getting pushed back because they're taking so long to do it.
I told that
That's
committee,
what
Helen.
happens. That's what happens. They make everything so bureaucratic that you don't get nothing done. But anyway, I'm glad, and I have a real concern with this log cabin business because I know maintenance for log cabins there's high maintenance for log cabins. I know, people that build the log houses, there's high maintenance to look after those things. So why not just build a square building that people can use? Get it done. Why do we need to have a fancy log cabin? Anyway, those are my concerns.
Okay, thank you for sharing your concerns with us. We have Melba next.
Yes, thank you. Hazel certainly has commented on, I guess, one or two of the meetings that we have had. And I'll be commenting on 5, I guess, meetings. The first one is the Six Nations Police Commission. Some of you may have been there. I know Mark and I were there at the badge ceremony that was held at the gathering place, and the following officers were presented with badges: Tyson Bumbry, Richard Smith.
You're muted.
Pardon?
I think you're muted.
I shouldn't.
I can hear her.
No, you're good. You're good. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Greg has been helping me with the sound, and now he thought I was muted, but I'm not. So I'll just continue. The badges were presented. It says L Horn. It's really Kai Horn. He's the acting sergeant, and Quinn Paulus, Cody Johnson, and Lucas Montour. And I wanted to point out that some of the duties of the officers, which community as well as council does not see that often, to say, what are they doing out there? You do hear that all the time. Though there's still criticism at times. And what the officers are to do to safeguard lives and to protect property, to protect the innocent from deception, the weak against oppression, or from intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, to respect the rights of all persons, liberty, equality, and justice. A reception followed this presentation for the badge ceremony. And further about the police, and if you haven't read it or understand what is happening there with funding, was announced on the 22nd of this year, that November, that Six Nations Police would receive $642,612 to install computers in their cruisers, mobile workstations, body camera, and automated license plate readers. And we need to thank Brandt MPP. I'm trying to think what his name is, and I can't. He spearheaded this initiative. On October, the Six Nation Police has a complement of 38 active officers, 11 full-time civilians, and 3 part-time civilian staff. And language is next. Six Nations Language Commission received funding from Community Development Trust, $360,000 for the year 23, and the Community Trust has given $90,000 for year 23 also, is to be used for salaries. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Iroquois Lodge. The Ministry of Long-Term Care application has been signed by the Acting Director of Health and CEO and submitted to Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care in September 22. Katie Jasparelli, Community Engagement Special Projects Officer, will be requested to present engagement information to Six Nations elected council for feedback and input. Also, at the November 17, 22 meeting, the RFP continues to be outstanding. Action by Tech and Public Works is necessary. 2 resignations from the building committee was announced. The administrator will explore another resident family member. Present building committee members are Andrew Joseph, Administrator, Donna Michaels, Chair, Acting Project Manager, Janet Gillespie, Portfolio Lead, Katie Jasparelli, Community Engagement Special Projects Officer, and Audrey Paulus Bunbury, Counselors, and Hazel Johnson, and myself, Melba Thomas. On November 27th, 22, a site visit was certainly experienced with long-term care. West Hill, the name of the long-term facility in St. Catharines, where we certainly experienced the setting in itself and how wonderful it is. And we certainly have visions and ideas of what can be done with our new building that will be a reality. The hospice, which has been mentioned by Hazel. I believe you mentioned, Hazel, that Glenn Stiers has turned the hospice file over to Brenda Johnson. And Vince Longboat received verbal confirmation. You mentioned the laneway and sign, but he was waiting for written approval, so I don't know where it's at as of this day. And then the location would be 4th line next to Burger Barn. And then I'm involved with Residential School Survivor Group on December 2nd. A little bit information what's happening there with the Secretariat and the group. Dr. Scott Hamilton, researcher, presented information on ground search data directly related to the ground penetrating radar, also known as GPR. Dr. Hamilton requested feedback from survivors in order to develop understandable, plain, clear language. The feedback will assist in preparing for a community information session. And also it's anticipated that the document will become a useful practice used by other First Nations. Research was the only thing on the agenda that particular day. And the annual survivor gathering, which has been, I believe it's the 3rd or 4th year now, held at the Woodland Cultural Center. Previous to that, there was a huge gathering in Sault Ste. Marie, where a lot of the survivors attended on a yearly basis for about 10 years. I sat on the planning committee for several meetings during the month of August and September for the September 30th gathering. I was unable to attend the event due to mobility problems requiring medical care. Those that attended from Quebec, US, and Ontario enjoyed the speakers' activities and dinner. Ava Hill was a keynote speaker along with other well-known survivor presenters. The Six Nations Secretariat partnered with Woodland and Wichitawan support services for an enjoyable day. All accommodations, travel, and dinner were supplied to survivors, no matter where they came from, whether it was the United States or Quebec or here in Ontario. And the plans are going to continue for the year 23. So that's my report for today. Thanks.
Yeah, well, Melba, we appreciate your reports that you gave to us. So I have Hazel next.
I was just going to comment on Helen's last statement that she had made with regard to the delays in that palliative care. And I agree that indecision, wanting to have different locations. And I associate it with somebody offering you a nice new car and you're standing there whining about the color, you don't like the color. So I think that's kind of sums up what this situation is kind of looking like to me. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, any other questions, any other comments?
Audrey,
Yes. Melba.
Audrey is Melba.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't hear very much when child welfare was presenting. There's a really big echo and Greg helped a little, but not completely. And right now, I think it's really terrible that we continue to have difficulties in this chamber, and I'm not sure why everything isn't hooked up so we can have a smooth transition to being here in the chambers on a consistent basis. So perhaps at our next meeting, we can have an update as to where it's at concerning the sound system and being consistently using our iPads and computers to have the meeting. So, but there was an echo and I couldn't hear what Cynthia or Karen were saying. Couldn't hear it all, so I couldn't follow it. So I don't know what's happening. So it's very discouraging to take part in something like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Melba. Just to bring you up to date on that, we deferred it so that council could talk together about this on Wednesday at our retreat. So it'll be on the agenda. So you'll be able to start again from scratch. Just they're going to make sure we have all the documents so we can read them again and be ready to discuss. Now, I have Sherry Lynn.
And I guess I'm gonna go back. Is Darren on?
Darren, are you on?
No, Darren is sick today.
Oh, is one of his people on to take notes?
Christopher is there.
Oh, is Trevor, is that to sit in for him?
I don't see anybody.
No, I can email them, Sherry Lynn. Do you want me to email them to log on right now?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure that's Darren's, but I thought that's what would happen. I guess that was my question was going to be directed to him is regarding the palette of being the 12th in line, but also too, if there's such a backlog, what are we lacking? You know, do we need more people, or I'm not sure what to be able to get a handle on these projects to get them moving, because it seems like again at a standstill. And if we have that many projects, there's got to be some kind of things that we can be maybe looking at. Just my thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Sheridan. I appreciate it. Hazel.
Yeah, in answer to Sherry Lynn's statement there, what I understand, it's the donors, 12 other people now in front of this palliative care, and you can, you know, very well assess that it's due to the length of time, because, and really it has been not getting a firm opinion on where it's going to go. They should have went with his offer right from the get-go. He even offered land, his land. I don't know why it took him so long to even do anything with it. Anyway, just wanted to make
Thank you
a
for clarifying that. I thought it was our department that was 12 in line, but it's his.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, thank you very much. All right, is there any new business that people forgot to tell us about? Okay, seeing there's none, then I'm looking for a motion to adjourn it to go into in camera.
I'll move on to.
Hazel, thank you. I need a seconder. Helen, thank you very much. All in favor?
Favor.
All right, any opposed? Seeing none, motion carried. We'll take a 2-minute break and then we'll go into in camera. Yeah.